English is such what I consider a 9 to 5 language that restricts how we can express things. So we get trapped in this when a lot of our ancestral languages, it's not so rigid. My ethnic lineage, my cultural lineage is in the Philippines. And historically, the Philippines wasn't called the Philippines. The Philippines became called the Philippines because of its colonizer, King Philip IV from Spain. Mike, can we talk about that too? Oh my gosh. So then I'm like, what's a Filipino? Somebody named after its colonizer? Wow. Okay. So I have a lot more unpacking to do and understanding historical context to that and how that relates to how I move around the world and how I see other Filipinos move around the world with that. Shh. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Shut Up and Heal podcast. I am your host, Dr. D. Some of you may know me as your ancestral healing coach. Others may know me as a founder of a wellness tech startup. And for some of you, you may just know me as your good old sis. Now, we are excited to be here today, and we are partnering with Amarai that matches individuals to alternative and complementary wellness practitioners. Now, matching you based on many aspects, such as your wellness needs, personality, and more to ensure that you get the right modality and practitioner at the right time of your journey. Now, with that, we are joined by one of the dopest practitioners out there, in my opinion. Now, Raynelle comes to us here. She's also an entrepreneur, mom, everything here, founder of Reno Consultancy Solutions, a nature-based coaching and consulting firm that empowers leaders to be able to embrace their true identity and self. Now, Raynelle is a certified personal coach. She is also an expert when it comes to things environmental and science. She really merges this together to create a unique experience to allow you to better understand and reach into your identity, harnessing a lot of the energies of the land, utilizing elements, and more. She is really guided by her spiritual mentors and elders and kind of brings this unique blend of everything. Raynelle and I have conversations all the time about so many different things, and we just thought, like, let's just get on this podcast and start talking. I mean, really, really, really talking about stuff. All right. Identity is such, I feel like, especially in the recent years, something that is talked about a lot and thrown around a lot. But personally, I feel like a lot of people, I don't think they get what identity is. And I think that comes from a place of, I'm not sure a lot of people really know that identity. It's more like clinging to whatever checkbox or whatever celebrity, whatever they can at that moment versus actually digging down to get to know self. So I would love to hear just overall your perspective on what you feel identity is when it comes to an individual, or what you feel maybe it's not. And do you feel that most of the people that come across your work have a good sense of identity, or is that maybe the basis or root of a lot of the work that you do with them? Well, identity is hard because it's political. And there, that's just it's hard to break into, like, where do we even begin with that when it comes to an individual? Like, how do we crack that open? Because the layers of it, a lot of what we're dealing with in our modern times and even the current events is like unraveling identity, because you could make it up. You could make up an identity. Like, white America is a made up identity. Like, where is the lineage origin story of a white American? It's probably, as from the family individual scale, it goes somewhere in Europe, right? Or, several places and Europe, right? So peeling back the layers and confronting what we're confronting today is like, identity is at the juncture of, like, where do you go with it? What's going to be the most helpful and useful for us in the long run? And white American is not going to last. And this is where we're getting the sort of uprisings and the doubling down on being white American. It's like, well, what happened before your family came to this land that is not
white America, but it's Turtle Island. You came from something before that. And I like to suggest to people who are confronted with that, like, I never thought about that. Or like, oh, that's new, a new perspective. Watch Finding Your Roots with Louis, what's his name? Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. He has the series on PBS called Finding Your Roots. And I'm just like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's like, put somebody in a position where now you get to hear the family origin story or the history through the family tree, and you actually realize how much of it you can better discern what has been politically placed on us versus like what the actual story was of like how you got to be you living where you live now, and maybe even why you have affinity towards certain careers or personality types. You know, you are passed down, you are a collection of those people passed down over time to now make you as an iteration of that. And so we could soften the lines of politics, but it's important not to dismiss that identity is political, especially today, now, with what we're seeing.
It makes it so tough because it is now so political. I think you said it really well and how multifaceted, multidimensional identity is. And there's so many different types of identity that, and I can even just speak from my life experience here. It's like there was a phase of my life where I was trying so hard to find the language, find how I can connect myself to specific identities. Though I knew it wasn't me, it was just the closest thing that I knew in the pool. So then there were parts of my true self that I was losing in that process because I was like, I have to, because it's so political, I have to like figure out how can I more closely associate myself with this identity to be able to better fit in. I mean, gone are those days, because now I don't give a flying finger. But there's this reality that so many of us, especially in those formative years, especially through the middle school, high school, these like we are really trying to figure our identity out. But the language around identity, the political climate around identity, the societal pressures around which identity needs to be, it's so heavy. We find
Mm-hmm.
ourselves just getting lost in the sauce and being what we see today, a bunch of people who are lost and who are trying to, and honestly, there's the energy of like, I really need to find myself. And what I thought was it isn't really it. Like we're tired and we're fueling, and you feel the anger, the resentment, the depression, the anxiety, all of that stuff kicking in and it's showing up for us. Now, I think it touches on something we talk about a bit, language, because I
Mm-hmm.
know like culturally and traditionally for me, our language is a lot more descriptive. So like even when we talk about what I'm going to use the West English race, it's not that you describe the person, you describe the language they speak to help identify them. And things like the black, white, and stuff, we didn't really have language around that. To this day, it's more of a description versus just like this, that. Even love, it's so many different types of love. So you describe it. It's not really just a word for flat out love, because love is so, there's so much identity around love for nowadays, like even for how you identify as a man, woman, whatever it may be. A lot of language around that didn't exist for not just my cultures, but a lot of other cultures. It was a lot more in between. There's a lot more fluidity in that. But English is such what I consider a 9 to 5 language that restricts how we can express things. So we get trapped in this when a lot of our ancestral languages, it's not so rigid. So I would love to talk about like with you some of what you talk about the lost languages and how that ties to identity, and just let's go with that. Let's let it flow.
Yeah. I mean, part of identifying is like identifying who you are is your name, right? Like it starts with your name. Like how do you feel about your name? Do you relate to your name? And for me, like, I have such a unique name that I really hated it for a long time because nobody could say it right. People still don't say it right. They don't know how to read it. I'm still quite not sure why. But the feeling of just like not being acknowledged just by being confused on like who I am because I can't even like say my name because it's unique. Right. And for a long time, I just had to like really come to terms with what that is my name, and there's a reason why that was my name. There's an intention behind that word, the name, and me. And so really doing some work around like, and then this would happen like during my birthday because those are times where I would think about myself the most. Right, like
Right.
every year just be like thinking about who I am now. And I think it just dawned on me how much weight we carry because we've lost how to name ourselves and how to talk and communicate like who we are. Right? Even so, there's so many aspects of like language that we could touch on as it relates to identity, but like going from me realizing how my parents named me because they wanted a very different name. They didn't want a common name. And that just spoke the intention that I am not like everyone else. And that was such a hard life to live, but that's what was given to me, right? Like, I just don't fit. I don't find myself like really fitting into like cliques or trends or whatever, right? And so that has a lot to do with the intention that I was brought into this world. And then understanding like my ethnic lineage, my cultural lineage is in the Philippines. And historically, the Philippines wasn't called the Philippines. The Philippines became called the Philippines because of its colonizer, King Philip IV from Spain.
Mike, can we talk about that too? Oh my gosh.
So then I'm like, so then what's a Filipino? Somebody named after its colonizer? Wow. Okay. So I have a lot more unpacking to do and understanding historical context to that, and how that relates to how I move around the world and how I see other Filipinos move around the world with that pride, with that name, being like, do you know that it's the man who wanted to like name a whole group of people after himself? What it's super colonization there. So who were we before that? And, get this, like one belief is that it was called Maharlika. The islands were called Maharlika, which sounds very similar to mahal kita. In Tagalog, mahal kita means I love you. So we lost the love to the colonizer.
My gosh.
So when we do identity work, we have to realize that that's part of us, right? That history of our people, our ancestors, like that lives somewhere in our bodies. There may be people in your family who just are not, it's not their time to like face that or confront that. That's not their role in life. But you definitely come from a storyline from that, if that's the land in which you come from, your ancestral lands, if you know that, right? And so I talk about language also being attached to land because and this is stuff that like, traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge would, like, that's a common knowing about how people lived on their ancestral lands pre-colonization, is that families were named after the mountain that they were near that sustained them, after the river, after some sort of natural element. That's how we recognized each other, is that I come from here. I come from this thing. And so our family names sometimes would be, you know, of those locations. And even discovering like, the Philippines has 7,000 plus islands. There's no way that you could just like say that we're one type of person. Like there's 7,000 islands, which could be populated by so many different other people and coming from other places. So there's such a diverse array of languages that are associated with those many islands. And the main dialect that I know of my family is Tagalog, and realizing that translating Tagalog means Taga-ilog, which means from the river. So we are people from the river. Our language comes from being a people from the river. And so unpacking like a lot of these things, they still exist, that we can still identify with ourselves from that identity of land, like where we come from and which language, our families passed down to each other and taught each other. And it's also important to know that like the land has language. Like that's why certain cultures and certain people have languages that they do, and they sound a certain way, right? Because this is how it embodies in a person, is through language. The work that I do is really helping us remember that it's not just about like you had to learn English and you lost your indigenous language. Like your parents may not have known the language. Your grandparents may not have known the language. But what can you claim for yourself as feeling right for you, that feels resonant in how you see the world and how you navigate, especially when you're on a land that your ancestors didn't come from, right? Like there's no lineage history that you know of coming from the particular place that you might have migrated to, right? You could still have that relationship. And it's because like the other part about language is, if you look at indigenous languages, there is no term that translates to owning land.
No,
There's
no.
If you ask somebody to translate something that is equivalent to like owning land, it's going to be something like land steward or like gardener or tender of the this and that, right? It doesn't own land. It's just not a thing. And this is where the weight of language has come, because at some point the colonizer came in and said, here's a new concept for you. We're going to own your land.
Mm-hmm.
That this like was like something you can't even compromise, like contemplate, like how does that even happen? If you've had generations after generations, like there is absolutely no intention ever put in the language or the people about owning a land.
Right now, I mean, the chills and chills. Yes. Oh, and just how you said this. I hope everyone that's listening, this is speaking to your soul, or if this is a concept that you're foreign to, please listen and sit down, because this is real. A lot of us, owning land is not truly something that is ancestral to any of us. And most of us and our people have been travelers, where we are in some location and then we move as a community to another. Like that has been how we have grown, how we have understood to be one with land. And I love how you explain the names and how the names would come from, like being by the river or the mountain, whatever location, because that really shows a lot of understanding that we as a family, we as individuals and land, we are in it. So important to have it, because the name is a big part of our identity. I loved how you said that early on. And it's interesting because I know I'm West African, so there's so many similarities in our cultures, and there's some key differences. I don't know. I don't even know if I want to say differences. Just the ways how we go about it are a little different. Because the name thing, at least for several of the tribes that I'm familiar with, including my own, we don't name children when they're first born, because what we believe in is that reincarnation happens a lot through families or through communities, and also through land and through animals as well. So what happens is, when a baby is born, they are the closest thing to the elders coming back. They are the closest thing. There's so much they have to teach us, and we have to listen. We have to get to know and understand. Now, typically you have, parents, but a lot of the grandparents, the elders of the village, that come and get to know the baby, and they start to see some traits or some similarities to others that have passed. And from there, also start to understand your personality. They see some key strengths and wisdoms, just natural things that are intuitive to you. And there you have the healers, the spiritual, the medicine woman, all of that. They come in to really welcome the baby in and understand and listen more than anything. You know, that shut up and heal thing, that whole thing. They do that. And then from there, it's like, you know what? We understand. So the name comes and our names all have meanings and how they're put together has meaning. So this is how we're named. And if you have an ancestral name that was in your family line that comes back to you, there's a reason. Likely they feel like you're a reincarnation of, or you're tied closely to in the gifts or whatever it may be. So the baby might be a few weeks or a few months old, sometimes a year or two old before they get a name, because we understand that your name is your biggest source of identity. For us, we feel that that is going to kind of lock in what you are meant to do, your purpose in this life. So you must be very careful. And there should be no hesitation in when you're establishing the name of a child, because that determines how they move in this world.
Yeah, it goes back to like words are intentions, right? Like, so what's the intention that this child has to be here in this world now?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a lot of the work that we have to do, is understanding our identity and, you know, doing it on our terms. Like, it's not for me to name who you are. Like, tell me who you are.
We want to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that we're shifting to a place where we're comfortable being different and we're comfortable just not even having the language at the time to express or even describe what we feel yet, versus I think what has been imposed on a lot of us of like, you have to be this, that, and the third, or that's it.
Yeah. Fitting into someone else's language. Yeah, that doesn't work for a lot of us.
No. Oh my gosh. No, this was beautiful. I want to make sure we touch on any last closing remarks you may have as it relates to this and just how multidimensional we are, the land is, space, all of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I mean, I think as closing remarks, it's just how important it is to understand how language has been used, maybe even weaponized, for some sort of gain, but remembering that you have the power to name it for yourself, to remember what the original language of the land is, and to kind of like honor that whenever you can. And at the same time, like, there's also the aspect of like having your own language with how you relate to land is okay. Like, we have been forcibly migrated out. We've had a lot of our families and our lineage. Like, the loss of language was such a huge hit, and the colonizers knew that. They knew that that was going to be a a powerful sort of erasure of a people. So reclaim it in whatever ways you can, and just knowing and understanding that it's not that land cannot be owned, but it is our responsibility. And some of that responsibility is starting to show up by, like, you know, replacing names of colonizers and, you know, people who actually harm other people, replacing their names with people who need to be honored, or the land that needs its name back. We're starting to see the sort of rising up of not only the land behaving in ways that it needs to come back into itself, but the people who are on that land and are tending it need to understand, like, we can no longer continue not knowing our language, not knowing the language of the land, or like how it functions, and that we're responsible and we're part of it.
Thank you, Raynelle. This is uh, I I feel like there needs to be like another 7 to 10 parts to this, especially with just how intense the energy is this year, 2025,
Mm-hmm.
needing to strip the air quotes identity and the reclaiming of lands, the reclaiming of groups, communities, the true force of having to move in a direction that aligns better with the community as a whole. So I think this year, and anybody who follows me, probably see some of the energy reports I put, but this is one of those years that there's really no hiding it. There's going to be a lot of taking down, stripping down, to rebuild. And if you thought you wanted to hide behind the scenes and be quiet, you're part of the problem too, because you got to speak up and you have to move with intention this year. It's like if you did not have time to rest in 2020, you got to pick a different year to rest, not this one. So I'm excited for how we see identity shake up, because I feel like we could probably do a similar conversation about identity later this year. Listen, I'm going to bring the tea. I'll bring the tea, sis. I will bring the tea. And as always, thank you, Raynelle. Thank you all for listening. And it's amazing to even just think back at this conversation and listen to the powerful words you said, how a lot of our indigenous ancestral languages do not have a language around owning land, because it's not a concept that we've ever tried to have or we understand. It's something that should not really exist. So imagine if we just continue to shut up and heal, how much more we can actually do, how much more community, how much language we can actually reclaim. Thank y'all. Until next time.
Thank you.